I'll kind of give it a little bit of context here and why we're going to kind of going over this. So Regina has experienced definitely a buyer's market. It is definitely saturated for sure. And the condo market has actually is even worse. There's about 1,600 listings right now, and a quarter of those, so over 400 listings, are just condos. So when that happens, there's definitely an oversupply, which means there's not as much of a demand for them, which means prices are getting driven down.
Right.
So I'm just going to ask you kind of I'll just kind of dive right in here. Mm-hmm. What are you telling these condo owners that want to make a move up, want to climb up the property ladder, but can't because their condo isn't selling or isn't selling for the price that they need?
To get rid of it. So essentially there's kind of two scenarios that we're running into, depending on when the client purchased the condo and depending on how much equity is left in it. Essentially, if a client doesn't have a down payment and their equity is all tied up in the condo and they can't sell it to get that equity out, something we're looking at is a refinance. We can refinance a condo up to 80% of the value, draw out as much equity as we can up to that 80%, re-amortize that mortgage over 30 years, which essentially would actually lower the client's payment as well. In that case, what we can also do is use that condo as a revenue property, as a rental, because the client that has the condo wants to purchase a home, but then we'll be stuck carrying two mortgages.
Right.
So what I can do is I can take that condo as a rental to offset that liability on the condo that allows more affordability on this end for their purchase.
Okay, so essentially you can either be a landlord,
be a landlord,
or you refi.
Well, refinance. You can refinance, draw the equity for the down payment, and still rent the condo out as well, because you're still going to have a mortgage payment on that property unless you can sell it.
Okay, so there is still a little bit of a risk involved with that as well. So
definitely.
How does a person go about, like, okay, so renting it out's my only option. Mm-hmm. What's the next step? What do you need to know and to move along that process?
If you're thinking about purchasing and you have a condo and you've spoken with a realtor like yourself, and maybe it's sitting there for a while and you understand that they're maybe going to take a loss on it and you can't get rid of it, contact somebody like myself. What we'll do is we'll look in an application for you. We'll determine what reasonable market rents would be on that condo that you own, and how much rental income we can use on that condo to offset the mortgage or the liability that you're still carrying on it. Then we can determine what you would afford for a purchase. One thing to understand is every lender looks at that scenario very different as well.
Right.
It's not standard qualifications across the board. So essentially, when I'm looking at an application like that, I'm looking at several different things. Each lender has a different DCR we call rental worksheet. I'm looking to see where your scenario would score in that DCR, that rental worksheet. And then depending if you're losing income or gaining income with that condo and that rental income, I'm putting it back into the application to see what you can afford for the purchase. So it's not a straight process, but I would suggest if you find yourself in this situation that you need to talk to somebody before you're looking at purchasing, so we can truly understand what your numbers would look like on the purchasing side. Also, if you have the condo and you think you may need to refinance for the purchase and you've already made an offer, you would then be refinancing as a condo already being a rental, which your interest rates would go higher as well. Okay.
So talk to you first before you start looking for a place.
Definitely.
Okay, so how does a person know what they can rent their place for? Like, do they just go get an appraisal, or how does that work?
No, what we do is we actually have an accredited appraiser come out and provide you with something called a market rental letter. That would determine, based on the area, what reasonable rents would be for your property. We have to request that letter because each lender will only accept a letter from certain appraisers as well. So the appraiser has to be on the lender's list. Other things that are acceptable is if you have a lease agreement. Say, you have a family friend, they're willing to rent your condo, you drop a lease agreement, that would be acceptable as well.
So what happens if this appraiser says, yeah, I can get $1,200 a month for my condo, but I only end up getting $1,000, so I'm have to pay the offset of that?
Yes, you would.
So there is still obviously risks involved with this. And there's obviously if your condo is vacant for a couple months, or your tenant trash is replaced or something.
You're responsible
something.
still for that mortgage payment. Just because you have that rental market letter on your condo doesn't mean you're going to get that rent. You still have to find a tenant that's willing to pay a rent on time. If they don't, you're still responsible for that mortgage payment on that property. That's why when I'm looking at an application like this, I'm trying to take that condo and I'm really trying to get that payment as low as I possibly can for affordability for my client. So when they're purchasing on this end, you know, if I can get that $1,400 payment down to, you know, $1,000, then I know at least I'm saving them cash flow if they're ever in a bind where they don't have renters and they can't afford.
So you're not using the max number.
Exactly.
Right. Okay. So how much, or is this different for every person? How much of that rent can you use?
It's different for every lender.
Every lender. Okay.
And it's different too depending on how they're scoring on the DCR, the rental worksheet, and it's different depending on how many properties they have. So every lender is very, very different. That's what I'm saying. We really need to look at the application, look at your affordability. It also depends on your down payment on the purchasing side as well, right? So
there's lots of factors.
There's lots of factors that come into play.
Right.
Yes.
So if you're feeling stuck, I guess your first step is to go talk to Natasha. That might be a good start.
Run some numbers.
Run some numbers and see if this is feasible. Scenarios. I mean, some people, like, they're up on the market or to say, like, oh, I'm going to see if I can sell my condo. If I get this money, great. But there's certain people that have to move, whether it's job related or they're blending their family or they're like busting at the seams. They need to do something. And when condos are sitting on the market for the amount of time that they are, this is a viable option that you can be looking at. Refinancing options too would be a key thing too. I feel like drawing out that equity.
Yeah,
I think that might be an ideal thing, especially when there's this many condos on the market. You're competing against so many properties, and that's another thing where I'm finding too is like you're trying to obviously every realtor is trying to get the most amount of money for you. But when your neighbor has the identical floor plan as you, which is usually the case in condos, sells for $30,000 less than what you're asking, it's really hard for that agent to go to bat for you and justify your prices. And it just might not be a viable option for you at this time. And renting it out will maybe give you that means to make that move and revisit the selling piece once the market does get a little bit more stable.
And I would just say if you're in that scenario and you do need to rent out your condo, do your due diligence. Do reference checks. Facebook somebody if you have to. Find out where they're working, you know, because essentially when somebody's in that property and if they stop paying rent and you're stuck with it, sometimes it runs into issues and more stress and burden than you need.
Yes, so that's where your agent will come into. A lot of us actually own our own rental properties or have great property managers that can talk you through this. We have a lot of blogs about, so you want to be a landlord. These are some things you need to consider and think about. Being a landlord isn't easy. That people think, oh, I'll just throw it up for rent. Like, this is something you have to seriously consider. Make sure that you are okay with the risk for sure. But I mean, sometimes, like I said, you have to make that move and it needs to happen. And this might be your only other option that you have. So we'll maybe stick around for a couple more minutes if there's any questions. But I feel like that was a really good piece of information that I know there's so many people that feel so stuck right now. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody.